In this video, I'm going to take a look at the first 8 problems from Chapter 6, Section 1, Exercise 3. I know this jumps ahead a little bit in the text. Certainly you'll want to backtrack and pick up at the very least Exercise 1. That first exercise, though, involves translating, whereas this particular exercise, the instructions ask you to determine whether or not a formula is well formed. I'm going to go ahead and add to those directions. If the formula is in fact well formed, then let's go ahead and identify the main logical operator. So let's jump into problem number 1. The first question we're going to wrestle with is this again a well-formed formula? Are the symbols in fact put together in the appropriate fashion? So for problem 1, this would read S and not T, or not U and W. And if you can't read my handwriting, which fine, certainly that's understandable, then again just follow along in the text. 6.1 exercise 3. So this one is in fact well formed. The symbols are put together in the appropriate fashion. So this one's a WFF, a well formed formula, and there will be a quick section on the test. It's pretty similar to this. So since it is well formed, again I'm adding to the directions. Let's go ahead and identify the main op. And for problem 1, the main op is the wedge. It's the wedge because it is the one that quote unquote comes in the middle. And when I say it quote unquote comes in the middle, I don't mean that literally. I don't mean you're going to get out a ruler and measure the length and divide by 2. Again, I mean it's the one that comes in between the 2 major groupings. We have S and not T grouped together in parentheses there on the left. And here on the right we have not U and W grouped together. And the wedge comes again in between those 2 groupings. Number 2, this one is not a well-formed formula. The left-hand side here of the dot is perfectly fine, not K or L, and so far so good. With number 2, there's the problem. And just go ahead and try to read this out loud. If what, then G or H? There's a missing variable here. If what, then G or H? Without that variable, this one turns out to be gibberish. We need an A in there or some other variable, and that'd get us one step closer to having a well-formed formula. But as written, number 2 is not well-formed. Number 3 is not well-formed either. The problem here is, again, on the left-hand side, E not F. In this case, there isn't a missing variable, but a missing operator. The tilde by itself can't go directly between 2 variables. We could say E and not F, E or not F, if E then not F, but the tilde again all by itself can't go directly between 2 variables, and again that's one of the things that makes the tilde sort of unique. Number 4 is well formed. Some are thrown by consecutive tildes here, and there's a parenthesis in between them, but 2 consecutive tildes is perfectly fine with or without the parenthesis. So 4 is well formed. And let's go ahead and identify the main op here. The main op in 4, since it is well formed, is the triple bar. Again, same basic rule applies. It goes in the middle of the 2 major groupings. If B, then not T on the left, and then not if C, then U on the right. The tilde becomes the main operator when it's on the outside of the outermost grouping symbols. This tilde is directly negating the C. This tilde is negating everything in parentheses, but it's not negating the entire statement. Again, the tilde only becomes the main operator when it's negating the entire statement. So if we put all of 4 in brackets, since parentheses have already been used, and stuck a tilde on the outside of it, then that tilde would be the main operator. But as written, it's of course the triple bar. Number 5 is not a well-formed formula. The left-hand side this time is fine. The problem is with respect to the right of the dot. This right-hand side of the dot is ambiguous. More grouping symbols are required. And ultimately we'd have to use brackets here. But does that left hand mean if A, then E or T? Or alternatively, does it mean if A, then E or T? Does it mean this? Does it mean that? As written, we can't tell. It's not a well-formed formula. It's ambiguous. Number 6 is well-formed. And initially, it might be a lot to wrap your head around all these new symbols, parentheses, brackets, in some cases even braces. But take a good close look at number 6, and you'll see that it is in fact well formed. The main operator in 6 is the wedge. And again, that's where it's the one that comes in the middle is somewhat misleading. Visually, lengthwise, it's not in the middle, but rather it comes in the middle of the two major groupings. On the left, we have not D, sort of out there on the left all by itself. On the right, we have everything in parentheses. The wedge comes in the middle. This tilde is negating the D. Remember, the tilde comes directly in front of that which it negates. This tilde is negating not the entire statement, but everything there in brackets. Number 7 is not well formed, and we commonly say such a thing, D and or Q. But remember, the only operator that can directly follow another operator, including itself, is the tilde. Whereas here we have two consecutive operators, the second of which is not the tilde. So that's not well formed. Again, we commonly say and or, but it's not well formed. There's also a problem, notice here on the far right. Try to read this, it's gibberish. If A, then and H. There's a missing variable here. So there are actually two problems with number 7. And then number 8, this one isn't a well-formed formula either. We're missing an operator. We have two consecutive variables, and I know there's a parenthesis in there, but two consecutive variables rather, without an operator in between them. That's not a well-formed formula. So continue to practice, and in fact the next exercise that I would recommend is 6.2. I know that jumps ahead a little bit. Eventually backtrack and pick up 6.1, exercise 1 on translating. But for now, go ahead and skip ahead to 6.2, exercise 1. There's just 10 problems there. It's going to take you all of about 5 minutes or so. For 6.2, exercise 1, they're all well-formed formulas. The only task is to identify the main operator, and we've touched on that in this exercise and in fact in an earlier video. Really, it's pretty simple stuff, identifying the main operator, but it's absolutely crucial. If you fail to identify it correctly, then really it's going to become impossible to pass the class. So practice this exercise. Go through all 10. It's not going to take much time. Check your answers just to make sure. And of course, by all means, let me know if you have any questions.